Can I just confirm that's the correct one, Andrew?
That's right. Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
it had your
Brilliant.
initial pretty slide that you had generated. So I merged
Brilliant.
and I merged all of the things to have all of the
Okay.
under, you know, the logo things at the bottom.
Yeah.
So
Brilliant. I will go on mute now.
Thank you very much. Hello all. It's good to see some of you again. Well, although of course everybody's mainly got their videos off. And welcome to those who have come. If this is the first session you've attended. I'm going to be talking about maintaining a neurodivergent inclusive workforce, and I'll go through the different aspects. And Josh, and I'm diagnosed autistic as of 2018 was when I was diagnosed, and Josh will be sharing some personal stories and other commentary at the end when I've introduced. What I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to do a recap of a little bit of what we covered on the first session. Oh, you can go back one slide. Sorry, just going through the what the steps are that we're going, and then go through a little bit more about why you really want to be maintaining an inclusive inclusivity for your neurodivergent and neurominority workforce, and then talk through a variety of different potential strategies, and then the personal stories. And what I'd like to say is that the assumption here is almost like so yesterday we were and the day before we've talked about the recruitment side and some of the things that you do when you first take someone, and here we're assuming that you've got your workforce through the door, but actually most of these things will be valid that will be really good to just have it in place and be thinking about for new people coming in, because some of the people want to hear about these things. Anyway, yeah, next slide, please. So a quick recap, neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So neurodiversity, just and sorry for those who already know these back to front now, but it's just helpful to re-go through for those who are joining for the first time. So neurodiversity is a term recognizing and celebrating the natural variance in human neurological functions. So that's everybody somewhere in that. And then you might have people who rather like you when you've got different sorts of averages. You have people who are close to the center on various different functioning and what would be considered, oh yeah, this is what quote normal looks like. And neurodivergent refers to those individuals whose neurological makeup diverges in a way that is typically quite noticeable from what that average in. I didn't say on Tuesday, but what I want to just say is you may also come across the term neurominorities, because neurodivergence and neurodivergent does have a little bit of a disease feel to it, but is widely used, and neurominorities is also beginning to be used more. So really use whatever you feel comfortable with. And I suppose I'm going to try and start using neurominorities more because it sounds a little bit less in one's in one's face as oh, neurodivergent. However, they're perfectly good terms, and about 15% of people are in one of the neurominority groups. Yeah, next slide, please. So just to run through the medical view and the social view. So here's the medical view. So what that typically means is that the medical view is here's a diagnosable condition. So be it autism, ADHD, Tourette's, dyslexia. They are, and one of the issues there is, of course, they've got very specific diagnostic criteria, and it's very much here are the particular things that you've got to meet as typically deficits or impairments, And if you don't meet those, even by a tiny bit, oh no, you're not one of those things. And one of the issues, though, is, and why it's might not help, is that you don't really want to be an expert in knowing what each of these things actually might mean. And for the person themselves, they don't really care about. I mean, obviously it's sometimes helpful for the individual to know about the label, but actually what's more important is how their the aspects of themselves come across, what difficulties they might have, what strengths they might have, and you don't really need to know the label. So the medical view is the view that's used when you're going for a diagnosis. But if we move on to the social model, and here this is a almost like a more it's in one sense more helpful because it's easier. You don't have to know all of the details in one sense. The important thing is you've got an individual in front of you. Who is this person? What is it that, and I talked about spiky profiles on Tuesday about the different aptitudes they might have, but the important thing is here's the individual in front of you. And by emphasizing inclusivity and acceptance of neurodivergence as natural aspect of human variation, it promotes the idea that neurodivergent individuals should be valued and included in all aspects of society. And by focusing and thinking, recognizing the strengths and celebrating the strengths and abilities, rather than just solely through the lens of deficits or disorders, it gives a more a balanced approach. But the important thing is and why we talk about emphasis on accommodations and reasonable adjustments, is about removing the barriers that get in the way of the person being able to interact and do the things that they, to be themselves within society. And part of the thing in the social view, advocacy and empowerment encourages efforts to promote understanding, awareness and acceptance. It empowers the individual to advocate for their rights, self-advocate and participate in decision making. And part of that is how you do the inclusivity of them. So, and finally about community and support, and quite a community. I mean, even though it may not appear that many neurominority individuals actually don't seem to be that social and such, like actually the strength of community and support that gives to many of them is essential in terms of fostering the connections and understanding, and both for themselves and for families and supporters that they might have, educators, employers, etc. And an important thing is we want to get to a place whereby all individuals can thrive. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit on Wednesday about the passport and what it is about some of the difficulties and things that challenges that might be faced. So, and we went into a little bit more detail on the spiky profile about these. So, communication differences. So many of us take things very literally as our standard position. So you might say something meaning one thing, but actually I might take it to mean something else. As it happens, because it's about aptitudes and such like, I've spent a lot of years learning, if you say that, or so that means that. If you say, or isn't it cold in here, if you're visiting, I understand that you're not just asking me to agree with you. You're actually pointing out that you might want some heating on, please. Sensory sensitivities. We talked about the over and under sensitivities, which can bring on severe difficulties of actually being able to do whatever task is in hand because of how it might affect being able to concentrate on those things, or just not be aware of if it's undersensitive, etc. So these, as you might realize, of course, these challenges, they can really affect the ability to do jobs and the satisfaction that the individual might get from that, and also the career progression. Yeah, next slide, please. So what I want to do is talk a little bit more about why it's really important to maintain inclusivity for your neurodivergent, neurominorities workforce. So I'll go through a number of different bits of information. Next slide, please. So as an employer or manager, why should you care? I'll give a little bit of detail about each of these headings that I've done. So often neurodivergent individuals really do bring unique perspectives, innovative ideas, often great at creative problem solving. And by embracing neurodiversity, employers can tap into the diverse talent pool and foster a culture of creativity and innovation within their organization. Of course, what you want to do for any particular person with it, and also the wider teams, you want to enhance productivity and performance. And therefore, if you want to maximize, as you would for anybody within your organization, you'd want to accommodate the needs. And here, neurodivergent employees often have quite bespoke needs which are useful to pay attention to, and by accommodating them, then that can increase the performance and productivity of both the individual and the teams that they're within. So supporting in their unique strengths and providing appropriate accommodations, and they'll achieve their teams and their selves full potential. By improving engagement and employee engagement and satisfaction, if you create an inclusive workforce where employees feel valued and supported, that can really lead to higher levels of engagement, especially if you're doing change things as well. If you want them to be involved in various different things, the satisfaction that they have, the loyalty, and if neurodivergent individuals who feel accepted and respected they're just more likely to be motivated and productive when committed to their work. And of course, these things, which they are things that you care about for any employee, but you really want to be thinking about why you want to do that as an inclusivity for neurominorities, because they're often different things to worry about. So the other things that it brings access to a larger talent pool by actively recruiting and hiring neurodivergent individuals. Employers can access a larger talent pool and attract candidates with valuable skills and abilities, and that can help address skill shortages and talent gaps within the organization. And often some HR things actually almost like knock out some of those people if you're not careful about being inclusive about it, both taking them on and then continuing with them. Of course, you have a legal and ethical responsibility, and some of the ones like autism are actually a protected characteristic where there are specific legal responsibilities. Some of the others might not have currently protected characteristics, but there is a level of ethical responsibility to provide equal employment opportunities and reasonable accommodations for individuals, and that's also, of course, with all disabilities. including neurodivergent individuals. And of course, in this day and age, failure to do so may result in legal liabilities, reputational damage, and loss of talent. Competitive advantage, well, of course, through that diverse perspectives and creativity and access to the larger talent pool, etc. By embracing neurodiversity, you can gain in many fields a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Now, you might go, oh, but that might not be relevant in terms of NHS and council. It's still very relevant for those as well, because actually you want to do the best that you can, and you don't want to be left behind and end up having to contract out more. So that will be a different sort of wording that you might use. And organizations that value diversity, equity and inclusion are often seen as more attractive to customers, clients, investors, leading to enhanced brand reputation and market competitiveness. We've talked a little bit about diverse perspectives, and often the innovation and problem solving that the neurodivergent individuals, they often excel in fields that require analytical thinking, attention to detail and complex problem solving. But of course, as I indicated, not all will have the particular strengths in that particular methods, but that's but often there are individuals who are neurodivergent who have these in really as much as you could possibly get. And by leveraging the unique strengths of the neurodivergent employers can of course drive innovation and improve decision making and find creative solutions to business challenges. So next slide, please. So this is almost like a continuation of it, and of course, I mean, part of the assumption I was making is that you've got your workforce, you've already got them through the door, and of course, employing and that part of taking people on and training is expensive, and it's just generally good to protect your investment. You don't want people who've come through the door and then 6 months later, because you haven't there hasn't been the appropriate adjustments and actually they walk out the door, and that's obviously an expensive thing. So also maximize the benefits of your staff. So I mentioned about individual performance, team performance, and of course that leads to an improved organizational performance, both short and long term. And it may not be just for the individuals, but actually if you've got an inclusive environment, then of course the whole teams will function better and there'll be better morale overall, and good feeling. And of course one of the side things about that is the health benefits, because they often a lower morale and lower engagement and happy feelings within these things often is associated with worse health. So the health benefits of actually improving things are often an important side part of that. Next slide, please. So as mentioned on Tuesday, an introduction to neurodiversity and neurodivergence, there's a large proportion of your workforce, 15%. If you've got a sizable workforce, then 15% means that there'll be quite a number of people in there, and they could be at all levels. And an issue is, in one sense, is many won't have been recognised, and especially this is in older adults. And actually, one of the current, I've seen another headline today about the NHS not being not having enough resources for doing diagnostics and then follow-on support. That's part of the thing, is actually now a greater number of people who are recognising, especially the younger people are more likely these days to be picked up and then now a number of older adults are going, oh, I recognise that, I've heard about that, I recognise that in myself, I think I want to explore that some more. But the important thing is that an individual who might be within your organisation, they may not want to disclose, and that's fine. But actually having the enabling conversations, or enabling, even just sharing that this exists, actually might help an individual go and explore for themselves, even if they don't want to disclose. Next slide, please. It's good for employees to know, even if you as a manager or as a the lead of the organizations, if the person themselves is able to explore and see, they're more likely to be able to come up, have some strategies. Now, it's better as an inclusive employer that employees feel comfortable with disclosure, and that means you can then work with them to make accommodations, etc. And the management of any issues that might come up. Next slide, please. So what can you do? Because of course that's the big question, and it really depends on what sort of organisation you've got as to what you can do. But many of these things are doable regardless of the size of organisation. But you don't have to do all of these things. But it's as good. The more things that are done, the better. And here are a number of examples. Sorry, I'm just hang on, just checking whether so I'm going to go through a number of these in detail. So about what it means to create an inclusive workforce environment, the planning of accommodations, and we've talked about that earlier in the week, coaching and such like. So I'll go through some of these in detail in a moment. Next slide, please. I mean, a starting point, which I hadn't got as a line on the other slides, is actually a review of existing policies and practices, because that's almost like sets the direction about how it's doing. Are there gaps in inclusivity that you might want to focus on, because that might also tip off which of the menu of things you're going to do. And introducing new policies and practices support neurodivergent, neuro-minority employees is a good step, because that helps shape the organisation in the right sort of way. Next slide, please. So I won't go through all of these in detail, at risk of boring, but there's a sort of like but I'll make sure that when some of the text for this comes out, all of these there'll be a little bit of text about each of these things. So there is but as an example, I'll pick up I'll just pick some randomly, but I'll start with the top one just because it's their diverse representation. So if you celebrate the diversity and diverse representation within the organisation, and actively seek to represent a variety of backgrounds and perspectives and such like, and that can of course includes, as everybody's been thinking about, diversity in race and ethnicity, gender, etc. But of course here we're talking about also about neuro minorities, and so the more celebration about the differences. And I mean, when you're building a team, you often want to identify in a particular team that you've got your balance of strengths and covered, so actually celebrating enough diversity to ensure that your team works well is really key. Let's just pick another one. So open communication. So an inclusive workforce foster open and honest communication amongst employees at all levels of the organisation. Employees are going to be feeling more comfortable in expressing their thoughts, opinions and concerns, and if they can do that without fear of retaliation and judgment, then that will mean that functionally the workforce will work better. That's just another one that I'll just pick out, and of course if there's any that you're particularly interested in, I can always go back again. Continuous learning and development. So inclusive workplaces tend to prioritise learning development for all employees, providing opportunities for training and skill building and career enhancements. But I mean, part of the thing is what do you need to do to tailor for some of the neuro minorities, because there might be some things that might be add-ons that you might not have thought of about within the learning development, but that also can be learning development for the organisation in understanding the neuro minorities. A critical thing, which I'll just refer to at the bottom, is leadership commitment. Inclusive workplaces will have leaders who are committed to fostering diversity, equity and inclusion, and leadership sets the tone for the organisation. And if you model inclusive behaviour, championing diversity initiatives, and hold themselves and others accountable for creating a supportive and welcoming environment for all, then you can build that's a really good step in moving forward. Overall, an inclusive work environment is characterised by a culture of respect, acceptance and belonging, where every employee feels valued, empowered and able to bring themselves to work, full selves to work each day. Next slide, please. We've talked about passports. It's really good to capture both for the person and for colleagues around what might be things to where accommodations might be appropriate, and plan on those reasonable adjustments. And so we had quite a talk on that, but that's just almost like a bit of a recap. But the important thing is that any sorts of planned accommodations, always think of them in terms of trialing as well. It's not you need to review and evaluate to see whether any of those things are work well or not. And you might want to revisit the plans when someone changes roles within work, or if there's any major reorganization. Even if the person's staying in the same way, there might be some things that might come through. Importantly, and this is about allowing voice to the person, is really it's important to co-produce with the employee. It's almost like don't just sit opposite, ask questions and write the stuff down. It's really about how to work with that employee. A critical thing often is really addressing workplace bullying and discrimination that can come along with any differences, and recognizing it and ensuring that it almost like, I mean, that's part of the thing that comes down almost right at that early stage of that training part for the organisation and people there. If that's done, then actually less discrimination is and less bullying is likely. Next slide, please. And so training programs for managers and colleagues on neurodiversity and inclusion in the NHS for autism and for learning disabilities. And of course, it's not just about for the people and the workforce. It's actually representing the fact that there's a lot of people who come and use who are neuro minorities or have a learning disability. So I mean, 1.6 million people have gone through the initial bit of training, and so that's a mandatory bit of training within the NHS, because that's coming from hey, we need to improve on that. And It's a really good thing to do for any organisation, even if it's a small bit of programme. And education a little bit about the conditions and their impact on the workforce and the workplace. That really can help about how to do accommodations and support strategies and such like, and therefore having some workshops and seminars on that, or failing that, at least be able to point where some of the materials are. Next slide, please. Creating supportive networks. It's more difficult if you're a very small organisation. I'm not sure what all of the sizes are that are represented here, but of course, if you've got a larger organisation, then of course there's likely to be many neuro-minorities, neurodivergent employees, and therefore it's more straightforward to get a support group going, and that's a co-support group in that sense. If you've got a small organisation, then of course you could do that in conjunction with other organisations, and that might actually just benefit your own organisation, is having some cross-cutting between others. Peer mentorship, which is almost like specific built-in one-to-ones, much as you sometimes have buddies when you're going into a new job or such, like a support thing. And it's, in one sense, it's a peer mentorship about the actual aspects, and helping signpost to external resources. Next slide, please. Gaining feedback from employees on their experiences is really critical to then going, oh yeah, am I doing right in these changes? So any regular assessments of the initiatives and their effectiveness, that will help guide if you're doing any major changes, because all continuous improvement and is always going to be based on measures and a little bit of, and you're getting some feedback. Next slide, please. And of course, celebrate success of any of these things that go on, because that also highlights the benefits of them. Next slide, please. We're almost at the end. It's really important to think about, actually, that there are different stages in life and different stages within an employment, especially if you're, I mean, I had a 20-odd year career in GCHQ, and of course my year one experience and who I am as a person is very different to when I was in middle age or if later on. And of course, even if I was going from different organisation to different organisation, then of course my age and how I am is going to may and the stage in life may have implications in the workplace. And I would say that at the moment, within neurodivergence and neurominorities, actually the research isn't great at the moment to give any particular guidance. So it's really, I mean, there's a bit, but it's not, there's nothing that you'd strongly want to go, oh, hey, do this. So therefore, it's just be aware of what might be happening at different stages, from people who are transitioning from education to employment, and what that might mean as a neurodivergent employee, and of course they'll have limited work experience, as will all people who are coming in as a young person, but they may not have actually built the extra skills and strategies that will stand them in good stead. So and it might take a little longer to develop. One of the things that, so I mean, I would say that I hadn't realised this at the time, but I crashed out of work a couple of times, and I think if I had my diagnosis, I wouldn't have. I probably would have finished by now, because I do like a bit of a change as well, but I would have carried on for quite a few more years, I'm sure, at GCHQ. That's just an example for me, but this is the same sort of thing for others as well, if there isn't the support and accommodations in place. Next slide, please. So that's almost like the end of the formal, boring slideshow, and I hope some of that has been useful to hear. I don't know, Josh, whether you would like to. I perhaps hand over to you if there's any things that you'd like to give as examples or anecdotes or personal stories. It's almost like going, here's a chance for you to react based on that and do on what you can bring. Josh has had obviously experience as himself as a person who's diagnosed ADHD and autistic and the issues that's bring, but he's also worked with other people as well in similar circumstances. Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I mean, that's yeah, thanks for your introduction. Yeah, I think for context as well, I'm also a learning manager. I'm just checking if you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, yeah, some great stuff there. And I think as an employer, I can imagine it can be quite overwhelming if you haven't perhaps yeah, thought beyond kind of raising some awareness. And I think yeah, before going to some anecdotes and stuff, I think what's really important is to have a plan as an employer. I think it's really, important to take that individual approach in supporting neurodivergent people. But I would also urge, employers to create plans that can take that strategic approach, like, Andrew talked about the social model and removing barriers for people and for everyone often. So I think, yeah, having a plan and being really transparent about your plan with all employees, I think is really, really important. So I think finding out where you are, how are you doing right now? How, how you might use the term neuro inclusive is your workplace. I think yeah, it's a good place to start. And I think sometimes, from experiences and from what I hear is sometimes it's off and on the neurodivergent people or people with lived experience of any kind of marginalization that they provide the learning. But actually, there are lots of ways that you can find out how you're doing, and looking at taking toolkits, for example, or hiring consultants. Don't know how much resource all of the employers here have, but really investing and resourcing in something that is really coherent, like a plan. Where are we now? Where do we want to get to? And really transparent plan of kind of where you want people involved, where you might want to to engage with neurodivergent colleagues, where you want to introduce learning. So I think, yeah, not getting stuck at awareness, because I think a lot of organizations, they get really excited. They'll put on kind of awareness sessions and then kind of stop there. And I think that can be really challenging for neurodivergent employees. Research says that it can potentially lead to burnout and exhaustion, always talking about it but not actually kind of going into action. So I think I know, and that's kind of a bit repeating, Andrew, what you've said, but yeah, I think some things that are really like practical and useful to actually talk about communication preferences. I know in my team at work we did some work around communication preferences, and not communication preferences for neurodivergent employees, communication preferences for everyone, so that we're all able to say how we like to communicate. Some people might want verbal instructions, some people might have kind of more preferences, and that's a really good place to start, like just talking about those differences and not creating kind of these norms that may exclude people. So I think that's worked really well in my experience. Yeah, I think, yeah, using resources. I know there's lots out there, and I think, Andrew, is it on Monday you're going to be having a session about resources?
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to, talk a little bit more. Do you think kind of practical examples would be useful, or kind of any? Oh, I can hear. I've seen a question, Andrew, when you crashed out of work, what would have helped you this time?
Oh, okay. Oh, I'll answer that back
yeah,
and then first, and then I'll go back to the resources. I mean, actually, what would have definitely helped is almost like if I'd known at that point that I was actually autistic, and what that actually meant, because that explained so many of the different pressures. And it also meant that talking about, I mean, because the organization at that point wasn't, I mean, now it has a network of neurodivergent people, and it in fact it has one of the directors who has an interest in it and keep it for inclusivity on it. And it would have been able, I would have been able to, I mean, I didn't have the strategies which I now have running, as it were, to enable me to make the appropriate spaces and not to just get stressed, not just by the stuff going inside work, but also outside work. So there's almost like it's what I would have, almost like what I'd say is it wouldn't have necessarily helped me at that particular time. If I'd known earlier, then actually I might not have got to the point where I would have crashed out work, because I mean, I literally had, first of all, 18 months off, and I didn't know whether I'd go back, and then I went back actually to a really fantastic job which was lined up for me, and then I carried on for a while, and then suddenly and it was like going, part of the thing is I hadn't realized as an autistic person that actually just the interacting with people in a way who I was not, it's almost like going, well, we're because although there is quite a lot, there's a lot of neurodivergent people in GCHQ, there's also a lot of neurotypical people, and I was almost like having to work around a lot of the things that are going on, which was just like going, well, these are pretty strange things. It's without going into lots and lots of detail, it's just so there's a whole process. It's not a simple answer. And in terms of in terms of resources, so that was the other question that's there.
So, sorry to be don't want to be chaotic with this, but just kind of on the burnout, I think the burnout question as well, I think it's really important to recognize, well, the individuals and organizations recognize things like burnout, meltdowns, shutdowns, understanding what those experiences might be, because you know, a lot of autistic and neurodivergent people experience meltdowns which, you know, really disabling, and can be and can come about by, you know, a number of things, from sensory overload to confusion and various things. And I think, you know, when you're experiencing that in a workplace, or shutdowns where, you know, I have experiences sometimes where I just can't physically speak, or I can't get my words out because I'm overwhelmed or confused, or I'm not understanding what's happening. And I think you know, we get dragged through school sometimes. You know, school, by the time you get to the workplace and you're perhaps not diagnosed, or you haven't identified that you're neurodivergent, you know, you know, you're already masking, you're already using up a lot of energy often to just try and be okay and show everyone that you're okay, and often use a lot more energy, or you think, well, you know, I'm not very good at, you know, some of these things, so I'm going to overcompensate. So definitely puts you kind of more at risk of burning out and shutting down and so on. So I think those conversations are really important to have, like in the community and in workplaces, rather than them being kind of you know, medicalized and and feeling quite shameful sometimes. So just wanted to add that, Andrew.
Yeah, well, no,
sorry.
I think no, I thought I was very valuable to add that. Yeah, thank you very much. And so I got the bracket in my head about resources and such like. I mean, actually, the resources are what I would say is that again, rather the resources that are available are, shall we say, somewhat chaotic also. So there isn't a here's your standardized 3-volume work which is here's all the answers. And it's like going, so actually one of the things that in terms of resources that we might have for Highlight on Monday, it's really just to highlight their existence. And actually anybody who's there on Monday, if you have come across some resources that are really good to do, whether that be, you know, video resources, whether it's actually particular organizations that support things, whether it's just information about reasonable adjustments, any particular thing, it's like going, I mean, because there isn't also one answer. So it's a bit like strategies. What is a good strategy for me for something is not necessarily a good strategy for somebody else.
It could be me being actually the opposite, couldn't it? Yeah, I mean, we could have, you know, we might have the same condition. You know, we might both be autistic, but we might have really opposing needs, and sometimes needs where if you're in the same environment, they can clash. And but yeah, I think with resources, I think it's really important to understand the experiences of a wide range of neurodivergent people. So I think I'd really recommend going online and following, just following various neurodivergent people. There's so many, you know, individuals that are advocating for change, and I think understanding those different experiences is a really great start. So like, you know, if you're into social media, start, you know, getting your feed a bit more diverse, also understanding intersectionality within the neurodivergent community as well. So I think really listening to a wide range of experiences is important, and it might not give you a plan of, you know, what you need to do, but at least, you know, getting that foundation of building understanding, I think, is a good step, as well as using some resources that might be more focused on, you know, this is what you need to do. If that's helpful.
Is there anything else you'd like to? Oh, I mean, Josh, could I just ask you about because you have done a workplace plan for accommodations and such like. Do you, how's that working?
No, I think I mean I've been part of that work, kind of really trying to create a plan. And I know the priority areas have been adjustments, because, you know, if you think about adjustments on their own, it sounds quite simple, but there are lots of complexities within adjustments around, you know, they're not just an agreement between you and your manager, but how do you communicate those adjustments if they relate to kind of things like communication or things that more people need to know, or so I think working with consultants, I think, can be really helpful, because they can give you a great you know, starting point. And I'm in a, you know, workplace that's done some engagement work, understanding people's current experiences of adjustments, and having that understanding, I think, really helps senior leadership to understand what you need to learn about. Because I think doing that engagement and having really good idea of what the current state of play is, I guess, allows you to hone in and be specific. Whereas, you know, gosh, if you look at some of these, I mean, look at everything that's you've presented today. It's a lot of stuff but kind of prioritizing, I think, is really important. So we've been, I think, as an organization, my workplace, we've been able to prioritize things that need addressing first, and then looking at kind of policies and so on later. But it's been and there's a lot of learning, and I think sharing learning between organizations is also really important, and I'd really encourage that.
Well, I think that would be something that might be good in a potentially in a few months' time we organise something whereby another almost like a follow-up session to this is for people to bring some of the learning about things they've been trying and doing, and to have conversations about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sharing learning and not being afraid to make mistakes, because I think the fear of getting it wrong can be one of the biggest barriers for employers to actually make changes. So yeah.
I don't know whether anybody, there's only a very small time for probably a couple of questions if anybody's got anything. There's Kirsten there is like
I was going to say,
looking at the clock going, oh.
Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions for Josh and Andrew, please do raise your hand or use the chat box. Please do, and there's no silly question either.
And don't worry if not, because I recognise also that we've talked about a lot of things, and yeah, there's potentially a lot to think about, and it's all part of the difficulty is each of the different places you're in will have a different different take on what's necessary.
I'd just like to raise a point Josh just made. Sometimes as employers, we worry about doing the wrong thing. And from my experience of being an employer and being a manager, your employees will tell you. So don't worry about doing anything wrong, because as long as everything is co-produced and communication is there, your employees will tell you if you're doing something wrong. You're not going to know unless they tell you. So that's my bit of advice. Don't ever worry about doing something wrong, because everyone is different. There's no more questions, so.
And I would just say if just even if nothing else, just think of at least a couple of things that you might do going away from here. What are you going to take back to the workplace? What might you do? Just think of a couple of things that have some level of practical. I'm always quite a favor of quick wins, because actually if you make some progress, then it actually helps go, oh, that's good, we can do some more of that, and share and be able to celebrate some of those things. But yeah, do I invite you to think of what two things you might do back, and of course obviously you're welcome to do more. I just picked off two as a random thing, which is more than one.
That's brilliant. Just like to say, if any of you haven't signed up for the resources session on Monday and you'd like to attend, please do contact me and I can send you the link. There is no limit on these sessions, so if you are free on Monday and you want to attend but you don't have the link, just email me or email employers@gloucestershire.gov.uk and we can send you a link. We are actually out of time. I just want to say a massive thank you to Andrew and Josh. I think this is one of the best sessions we've had this week. So thank you for giving up your time. Andrew, it's always a pleasure. Josh, it's always a pleasure. Everyone have a fantastic weekend. And again, if you want to attend the session on Monday, but you don't have the link, please let me know and I'll send you the Teams link. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.